Hello everyone and welcome to our new orchard workshop. I'm Katie, I work at Unity Gardens. I'm the Director of Operations and also the Program Manager for our orchard program. So I've been working with fruit trees for the last 3 or 4 years and now we've been teaching everyone else how to take care of fruit trees. This class series is made possible through the Community Urban Forestry Department with the DNR in Indiana and is also in partnership with the Giving Grove. So in this series, we'll be talking a little bit about why you would want to have an orchard or maybe why not, how to get your trees, what you should be planting, where you should be planting it, what's that planting process look like, and what's your initial maintenance to set up your tree for best success. So first question is, do you really want to plant a fruit tree? And we'll talk about some of the positives and negatives that come along with having an orchard. So we'll start with the disclaimers, which are the negatives. It's a long-term commitment. Fruit trees would take up to 7 years to begin bearing fruit, and some of the nut trees take even longer than that. So from when you plant your tree to when you'll actually get fruit off of it, it's a waiting process. So if you are someone who wants to get benefits right away, fruit trees might not be the best bet. And they can live, on average about 30 years, but some will live hundreds of years. So people have inherited fruit trees that their grandfather planted that are still producing apples. So wherever you're planting your fruit tree, hopefully you will have that land and your ability to care for it for a long period of time. It's also a more expensive startup cost. So a fruit tree will be much more expensive to put in the ground than a tomato or a tomato seed. And they do require specific tools for care. Not aggressively, but you will have to get things that are outside of the normal gardening tools. It needs more space than an average vegetable plant. So the average tree needs about 20 feet in circumference. So if you have a small space, it might not make sense to do fruit trees rather than a smaller garden. And you will have lots and lots of harvest. So if you are someone who is planting an apple tree, but you're one person, you're going to have bushels of apples. So do you want to give those away? Do you want to get into preserving? But you should have some kind of plan for what you're going to do when these fruit trees start producing at their peak. And there is a higher knowledge threshold into taking care of fruit trees than I would say with a vegetable garden, especially because fruit trees are perennial, so they live for many years, which means that if you make a mistake in that first year, you'll still be dealing with that mistake in another season, and even maybe the season after that. So unlike a tomato plant where you put it in the ground, oops, you messed up, you didn't stake it right, you didn't deal with disease correctly, okay, next year you just start over. But a fruit tree, you're learning as you go, and sometimes that can be tough. But on the upside, there are definitely huge benefits to having an orchard. They are less maintenance than a garden for relatively the same amount of harvest. And that maintenance is spaced out over a year rather than all concentrated in the summer. So it takes about an hour a week to take care of 10 trees. They give you tons of production over a lifetime. So even though there's maybe a more expensive startup cost, that is more than paid back if you take care of those trees in how much food you get out of it. And you get the ecosystem services of a tree. So you get shade, you're providing habitat to lots of birds, lots of caterpillars, you're getting air purification and carbon sequestration benefits. So you're also improving your local ecosystem. So you're getting all those benefits from something that's also giving you food. And a lot of fruit trees are producing things that are really expensive in a grocery store, especially if you're buying them organic. So apples, peaches, cherries, if you're getting into brambles, raspberries, blackberries, those can be really expensive. And if you're taking care of them yourself, you're always going to have them. And you know exactly what went into them. So you know you're getting that organic, or if you're choosing to spray non-organic, but definitely cheaper. I should also say, with a high harvest amount, if you are near Unity Gardens and you have too much food, you are always welcome to bring it to us and we will share it with the community. So now we're going to get into some of the site requirements. So what is needed out of a space to successfully grow fruit trees? So first, your fruit trees will always need sun. And that's for a few reasons. First is that sun will help in the ripening process. So if you want a lot of fruit off of your fruit tree, you need to have access to sun, about the same as a vegetable garden. So 6 to 8 hours per day. If you have more than 8 hours, wonderful. The other thing that sun does is it dries out the tree, which makes it less susceptible to fungal diseases. And trees especially cultivars, are really susceptible to diseases. So having that tree dried out so it's not susceptible to these diseases is really helpful. You also want to avoid frost pockets. So you can see in that bottom picture, there is an area where air will settle. So in the cold seasons, in the winter, if you're planting your fruit trees in a valley, they're going to experience more frost damage than if you planted them on flat ground. So you want to make sure that you are avoiding those low-lying areas where frost could gather and potentially damage your trees, especially if you're planting things that are on the edge of your zone like peaches in northern Indiana. You want to make sure you have access to water. You will have to water your baby trees, and in periods of drought, you'll also have to water your mature fruit trees. So if your water spigot is an acre away, or if you have to carry buckets, or if you need to roll out this giant long hose, you are way less likely to get out and water. So make sure that you are choosing a space that is easy for you to water. Well-draining soil. Fruit trees do not like having wet feet. If their roots are constantly wet, they'll start rotting. So we want to avoid that by making sure that you have well-draining soil. And the easiest way to tell that is after a rainfall, if you go out in the yard, is there standing water? If there isn't, you're good. If there is, don't plant a fruit tree there. Or you can build up that soil, or you can add a raised bed and raise that water level so that you can plant something there. And very, very important, you want to call 811 before your planting day to make sure that if you are digging, you are not digging into utility lines. So that is extremely important. You do not want to break a utility line when you go to plant your trees. This is technically pertinent to the last slide, but another reason that you want to have sun on your trees is it also invites pollinators in. So if you go out and look at a fruit tree and you look at the south-facing side or the side that gets the most sunlight, there's always going to be more fruit set on that side because that's where the bees are visiting. So those are the flowers that they're more likely to pollinate. So you want to make sure that you are planting in a sunny space also to invite those pollinators in so you get fruit set. But another consideration when it comes to where you should plant your tree is how big will your tree be when it is mature, when it's at its full size. If you are getting your fruit tree and you see, oh my God, it's just a little stick, I could put this anywhere, in 15 years, will you regret where you planted it? So here is a diagram from the DNR's tree keepers handbook, home book, and you can see that they are pointing out things in a regular home that would be considerations to make when you're planting your trees. So you don't want to plant your trees under a power line because when that tree gets too tall, the electric company is going to come and top it and cut it essentially so that it's not blocking the power line and it's not a hazard. You don't want to put it too close to your house, too close to your roof. You don't want the roots to be too close to concrete where the roots would grow up and crack the concrete. So these are really important things to consider. Depending on fruit trees, because you can get them in different sizes, you may be able to plant closer, you may be able to plant under power lines if you're getting dwarf trees, but consider these things, know the mature size of the tree that you're purchasing, and make those considerations before you put it in the ground. So usually 15 feet from buildings, 3 feet from pavement, and 25 feet from waters, and 15 feet between trees. This is relative to non-fruiting trees, so you may be able to get away with a little bit more on these fruiting cultivars that are smaller, but keep it in mind. So here's a resource that the Giving Grove put together where you can see how much space you need between different types of fruit trees. And this resource is on Unity Gardens website under the resource tab, so if you'd like a copy for yourself, I found it to be extremely helpful. But you can see that there is variation between different types of trees. So for example, a chestnut tree needs way, way more space than a serviceberry, which in the forestry world is debated whether or not it's a tree or a bush because it's a much smaller tree. Or a hazelnut, which is also kind of grows like a bush, versus a pecan, which needs a lot more space. So depending on what you're planting, more space or less space. So now we're going to talk about what you can and can't grow specifically in Indiana. So the first thing you want to consider is your hardiness zone. And even if you're watching this from outside of Indiana, you can still look up your hardiness zone and draw some conclusions from that. So we're located in South Bend, which is in northern Indiana, and we're zone 6A. Now what that means is that we know what our average low temperature will be. So that's what a hardiness zone is it tells you the average annual minimum temperature. So zone 6A is about -10 to 0 degrees. that is what will usually be our annual minimum temperature. We have had years that it's lower than that, and we have had years where it doesn't hit 0 at all. So that's why they say an average. Most nurseries, when you go to buy your tree, they'll say, oh, it's compatible with zones 5 through 8, zones 2 through 6. And if you're in zone 8, that tree is not meant for you. Or if it's for zones 4 through 7 and you're in zone 5, perfect. With climate change, I do get a little concerned about planting on the edges of our zone because we're getting some real temperature extremes. So if a tree is meant for zones 5 through 9 and you're in zone 5, that's a little sketchy because in a less than average year, you might be outside of the zone that the tree is suited for. Yeah, so if you're planting something that can't get as much cold, and you do have a lot of cold, you'll damage parts of the tree, especially your fruit set. And if you're planting things that need cold, a lot of fruit trees have a certain amount of chill hours that are required for it to produce fruit. So that's especially true of apple trees. So it is important to plant within your hardiness zone. So here's a short list of what can and can't be planted in Indiana, in northern Indiana specifically. And this is considering outside. So you can technically plant a lemon tree and bring it in and out of your garage every year if you would like. But the things that tend to do really well, apples, European pears, Asian pears, European plums. I actually have not had a lot of success with plums, but theoretically they should work well. Pawpaws, mulberries, persimmons, and tart cherries. Tart cherries do really well. Things that are not super consistent, Japanese plums, peaches, nectarines, sweet cherries, apricots, and figs. These all do better in southern Indiana where we don't get quite as much cold. They will do fine in northern Indiana, but you may have years that you don't get fruit because we had a really low frost or we had a really late frost. So usually peaches, we get a crop every other year, maybe every 3 years we skip a crop because it was so cold. So if you want to plant peaches, you can do it in northern Indiana, but you won't necessarily always get peaches. Things that will not survive outside are oranges, jackfruit, limes, lemons, coffee trees, banana trees, dragon fruit, all these tropical fruits. If you would like to bring them in and out of the house, you can do that. If you've got a covered growing space like a greenhouse or a geodome that you would like to heat, you can do that. But if you're just putting it outside and leaving it there for the winter, it will not survive. So the last thing we're going to talk about is pollination. So all fruits are ripened, mature ovaries containing seeds. That's the botanical definition, which means that all fruits need to be pollinated in some way. Often that is done by pollinators, so little bees, butterflies, birds, an organism that is carrying pollen from one flower to another flower. Trees that require cross-pollination means that you need 2 different varieties, and a little bee needs to take pollen from one flower on one variety to another flower on a different variety. So sweet cherries, pears, apples, plums, persimmons, and pawpaws, you will need 2 types of apples to be able to get fruit set. You will need 2 types of pears to be able to get fruit set. And they need to be planted within 2,000 feet of each other and flower at the same time. A self-fertile tree means that you only need 1 tree to receive a fruit set because the bee will visit flowers on the same tree and that will work for the tree to be pollinated. So tart cherries are self-fertile. Some sweet cherries, like they develop varieties that are self-fertile, but if it's sweet cherries are not typically self-fertile, and so I've found that those do not work as well as if you had planted 2 different sweet cherries. Peaches are self-fertile, nectarines, apricots, mulberries. The other thing you can do is you can graft different types of varieties onto one tree. So you attach 2 different varieties onto the same stem, and then the bee can visit between those 2 varieties, and it's cross-pollinating but on the same tree. So if you don't have space for 2 apple trees, you can get a grafted variety that has 2 varieties on one tree. Those are a little weirder. I personally haven't experimented with them because I think they're a little harder to take care of, but if you have space limitations or you just want to see what's going on, also an option. So when you're choosing those 2 varieties, it is important that the bloom time overlaps. So as you can see, this is a pollination chart. Often when you're buying from a nursery, they'll have recommended pollinator varieties. So they'll say, oh, this Jonah-free apple is great to plant with a cane apple because they bloom at the same time. But if you had something like the Ida Red apple up here at the top of the chart, you wouldn't really want to plant it with Rome because they overlap for less time. So there's less time for the bees to visit between those flowers because they're not open at the same times. So important to make sure you have two varieties that overlap. Lastly, you will get zero pollination if you have no pollinators in your garden. So it's really important to be taking care of your pollinators. You want to avoid broad insecticides and systemic insecticides that get taken up by plants. You want to plant native flowers that bring in our native pollinators, and you want variety in those native flowers. We'll be talking more about companion planting in my permaculture series, but if you're in South Bend and you're thinking about what should I plant that's native that will bring in those pollinators, Naturally Native Nursery and Wild Ones are two amazing resources. Wild Ones actually I'm pretty sure it's a national organization, so if you're not in Indiana, you can probably find a local Wild Ones chapter that will recommend what to plant. But it is very important to have pollinators to do your pollinating. And I put a little picture of this apple that is misshapen because it didn't get fully pollinated. So you can see if you don't have those bees that are happy to be there, you'll get some wacky fruit.